Hi, and thank you for joining me for another video. Friends, this week's Parsha is Parashat Vayikra, the first Parsha in the book of Leviticus. Now, this sefer is typically one that people avoid commenting on, mainly because we assume that what could a book that mainly describes sacrifices and rituals tell me about how I could live a better life? And if it was worth studying, rabbis would teach it more. And that's really, my friends, one of the big problems that arise when people rely too much on rabbis and commentaries to explain the text, assuming that if there was anything worth extrapolating from the text, Rashi or the Ibn Ezra would have done so. And if they couldn't make it meaningful in any way, what could I do? And friends, the result of this type of thinking is what gave birth to groups like Christianity and even modern day silly Jewish customs like swinging chickens over your head on Yom Kippur, ideas that sprouted from a misunderstanding of the biblical sacrificial system. In other words, a misunderstanding of this Parsha. And that's why, friends, I believe that it's my responsibility to make not just this Parsha, but Sefer Vayikra come alive and transform it into something you could feel comfortable speaking to others about. And friends, before anything, we have to understand that sacrifices and sacrificing to one's God was a universal practice of the time. In other words, everybody did it, which is why the Torah, although being an ethically revolutionary book for its time, in the area of ceremony chose evolution instead of revolution. The idea of using the same system that was in place, but elevating its significance to an ethical level, to the point that the Rambam even states in Mor Nevuchim that the Almighty used the same old sacrificial system used by pagans to slowly wean us away from it. In other words, from its outset in Torah, it was just a tool to train us ethically and morally to think and behave in a certain way. Now you're thinking, couldn't he have used money or, I don't know, have made the Israelites do push-ups or something? Perhaps, but I tell you that the message I see being brought down here is that you don't make the world better by flipping everything upside down and instituting university-accredited techniques, but rather by slowly improving the situation you happen to be in by small increments. Again, by evolution, not revolution. And not that sometimes revolution isn't called for, because if the institution is completely unethical and immoral, then there's nothing you could do but destroy it and start all over. But here he's telling us that God never considered the notion of sacrifices in themselves as anything immoral. He may have thought that it was less efficient than, I don't know, perhaps doing push-ups, or more messy than paying a fine, but not unethical, which is how it's actually seen in the secular world today. Why? Because we've elevated the animal to the level of humans, which is why I'm always astounded when I see non-vegetarians speak on how backward the sacrificial system was. Did they forget that the meat or dead carcass they are eating was also slaughtered? It was also sacrificed, perhaps not to God, but to the meat industry of today, and to the point that you even see religious people nowadays speaking such nonsense. When kosher meat today is also slaughtered in a religious fashion and then eaten just as in the Torah. And our bracha today is the same one the Israelites would have said back then before eating their sacrifices. No, friends, I really don't see the difference, not to mention that the average person who criticizes the words here in Vayikra are typically the irreligious who would drive down to McDonald's, order a Big Mac, take a bite, and not make a connection of what he or she has just placed in their mouth. Which is one of the reasons the Parsha starts out by telling us that when the Israelites bring a sacrifice, it must be from their herds, from their flocks, so that you could realize what the heck you're doing, that this isn't some happy meal, that this is Betsy you're killing, right? And this is also teaching us that it's okay to kill animals, which we could see in Shemos the Egyptians disagreed with, on how they would rather starve during the famine than eat their animals, or how they were terrified when the Israelites were going to slaughter their lamb god, and at the same time had no problem with bringing human sacrifices, which is identical to what we see today when liberals will support organizations like PETA, but at the same time believe that a woman has the right to murder her own baby, which is nothing less than human sacrifice to the mother's own ego. Now, note that this is the same Torah that also taught that you must feed your animals before you feed yourself, and that your animals must rest on the Sabbath. So this is no excuse to torture animals, but rather the Torah, by limiting blood sacrifices only to animals, was telling us that human sacrifices would never be practiced in Judaism. My friends, are you beginning to see the evolution? Then, friends, in the second parak of the Parsha, it begins to slowly introduce a new concept. And what's that? That blood is not necessary for the atonement of sins. It states on how you could bring grain and even incense as a sacrifice. And note that the atonement that was being done by these sacrifices was only for unintentional sins, to the point that the word appears 4 times in this Parsha. So in other words, it wasn't God wiping away your misdeeds, because honestly, they were done b'shogeg, by accident. There was no ethical, graceful cleansing being done, which is how forgiveness is defined nowadays, especially by Christians. No, friends, the sacrifice in Judaism has always been the reminder not to do it again. Not that God makes the wrong right by your sacrifice. Why? Because it clearly states that the only way you get forgiven for intentional sins is by repentance and reparations. And honestly, what other way could you be made right? Think about it. I hurt you and then I bring a sacrifice and God forgives me? Does that make sense at all? It even states that if you steal, you repay more than what you stole. And if you harm someone, you pay and overly recompense him for his damages. This, my friends, is a real religion for real people. There's no deathbed confessions in this theology. In other words, this, like everything else in the Torah, is only here to make you a better person. To the point that the word korban, sacrifice, comes from the word to get close, from karov. And friends, if you're hearing me today and you want to get closer to God by entering under the wings of the Shekhinah and becoming a Jew yourself, please visit Torah Judaism International at torahjudaism.org. And for more info on living a Torah life, please visit bejewish.org. Thank you.